This really speaks to how we value life. And I think in our culture, in American culture, how we value life or don't value it is directly related to our invisibilized history of genocide and enslavement. I'm Autumn Brown, a queer science fiction writer, a theologian, a mother of dragons, and a healing justice facilitator for social movements, living in rural Minnesota.
And I'm Adrienne Marie Brown, author of Emergent Strategy, co-editor of Octavia's Brood, writer, facilitator of Black liberation work, auntie extraordinaire, doula, and pleasure activist living in Detroit.
And this is How to Survive the End of the World,
our podcast about learning from apocalypse with grace, rigor, and curiosity. And today we're going to be talking about some things that will probably be really intense for folks to listen to. This is going to be the first of our conversations around Me Too and Time's Up and the work that has been happening to bring down the patriarchy and misogyny and the culture of rape culture in this country. So we know this is going to be a tender conversation. We just want to let people know up front that that's the territory we're heading into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And should we start off with the quote?
Yeah. We found an Earthseed verse that is actually very related to this moment that we're in. Adrienne, do you want to read it?
Sure. So Octavia wrote, "Civilization is to groups what intelligence is to individuals. It is a means of combining the intelligence of many to achieve ongoing group adaptation. Civilization, like intelligence, may serve well, serve adequately, or fail to serve its adaptive function. When civilization fails to serve, it must disintegrate until it is acted upon by unifying internal or external forces."
That just feels so relevant to the moment that we're in. We are witnessing a disintegration of a particular way of being, even a particular way of understanding what is acceptable inside of culture, inside of civilization, inside of society. And similarly, we're witnessing a grasping, I think, holding on to many of the things that people perceive to be positive about that other way of being.
Absolutely.
I think that we're all kind of inside of this grasping, inside this moment of, I think we see it a lot, particularly around the artists, like the men who create art, who have been publicly brought down. Yes. We're witnessing the mourning, the grief and mourning that people are inside of around what does it mean? What does it mean to lose not just the respect for the person or a belief in the rightness or goodness of the person, but also what does it mean to potentially lose access to their work? It's been a really interesting moment.
I feel like there's something around like reality and projection that's also falling apart. It's like the way we have understood gender has been a projection. The way we've understood the power dynamics of intimacy has been a projection. And a lot of how we understand the personalities of other people, and especially famous people, is projection. And now it's like reality is interceding on all of those projections. And we are asked, are we willing to look at reality? And then once we've seen it, once we've shared it, once we've spoken it, what then? So it's been a few months. It's been like almost a year of this conversation happening in the public sphere. And I know that we have had, talks about it and check-ins about it along that journey, and that it's been shaking us both up. And I know that there's a few people we want to interview around this, or have talked about interviewing around this and having conversations with. But it felt important to us to first just have a conversation between us around what has this felt like? What has it surfaced in us? What questions, what new understandings of our own histories? Because I think that's so much of what's going on here. And just to name that this absolutely feels like an apocalypse of a moment, right? Like, to me, it definitely feels like, something has changed and there's not really a going back. And we're still trying to figure out what are the ways forward. So let's start there. It's just like, what for you have been some of the things that this Me Too moment has surfaced, this Me Too movement and the sort of apocalypse of rape culture?
Well, it's so fascinating to think back on, and I know that there have been multiple iterations of, I think there's something, even before I talk about what my experience has been in this last year, I want to remind myself and remind all of us who are having this conversation that there's a broader context in which this moment has become possible. And I was thinking particularly in the last couple of days about the way that the crisis of sexual assault and sexual abuse inside the church was uncovered in the last couple of decades. And also in the military, right? That in the last couple of decades, we've had these two very public, very media-driven institutions, or two experiences of these institutions really being torn open so that people could see the level of abuse that was happening inside. And I think that that's important context for this particular moment, that, that this is not happening. It's not like there's not a foundation on which this, the way that this movement is happening is built on.
Exactly.
And so it's interesting to think about what is the shift from, the nature of those other experiences of institutions being really pulled open, and a lot of that being about investigative reporting and in the work of investigation itself, and being very driven by facts and data, and interviews and discovery and all this stuff. And that we are in a different iteration of this same, and trials, exactly, and some idea that there is there could be a judicial measure by which justice could be served.
Yes.
And I think we are in a different iteration of this same work, and this new iteration is about really uncovering the ways in which none of this none of the assaults are isolated incidences. Yes. Right? That it's part of this continuum of experiences that we're all living inside of. Yeah. And that everyone's story of their own assault experience matters.
Yes.
That it's not, that it doesn't have to be. So there's something in this particular moment of that we're navigating both the horror of how widespread it is, as well as the horror of how everyday it is, and the horror of things that we wouldn't typically consider to be horrible, but now we can see them as horrible inside of this broader context. I think that that's one of the things that this particular movement is doing, is enabling us to see the things that we perceived as normal as not normal. And that's really important, because the previous iterations were really about saying, look how horrible this pedophilia is. That's why it's so horrible that's why we have to do something about it.
Right.
It's primarily about how vulnerable people are, right? And this is more about, this moment is about both our vulnerability as well as about the way people's agency is taken from them. And so anyway, so I just wanted to say all of that to begin with. I just want
to pause you there to say you're so brilliant, and I really appreciate that sort of step back and overarching, like, oh, what is the context of this? And I think that it's so important that what you're naming, it to me, it's like, oh, it's so much of how we function is to be like, oh, it's over there. Over there, that is a horrible thing. Like, over in the military where people are like, the structure is like this, or over in the church where the structure is like this. It's so bad. And then even in this work, it's been like, oh, in Hollywood, it's like this. Oh, in academia now, it's starting to be like, it's like this. And I think that the sooner people can understand that it's like, what we're learning is like, it's completely pervasive. It's, oh, in every household, it's like this. In every workplace, it's like this. On every public transportation, it's like this. And to be like, we are swimming in a water. It's not like we go on vacation to rape land. It's like we're swimming in the water of rape land all the time, right? And I mean, but I think that people kind of feel that it's like it's somewhere far off and exotic that you go to and get harmed. And it's like, no, it's the mundane spaces. And it's the places where you ostensibly should feel safe. So I really appreciate you naming that. And also that helps me even remember like what the first couple of months felt like versus what it's starting to feel like now. Cause I feel like the first couple of months were so powerful and hard, right? It was just like, oh, every single time I get on any social media, I am basically signing on to see who else has decided to share their story, and reading these stories that I was like, oh, and some of them touching into my own experience and some of them, different from my own experience, but really starting to be like, these numbers of 1 in 4, 1 in 3, every single person, like it just started to be like, oh, the numbers have stories and the stories have to change. They change us.
Yes. Yeah. I think, the summer was very tender for me. I actually had to avoid social media because, at the same, and it's curious to think about now, but at the same moment that this, that Me Too was really popping off in the summer, I, in a way that I thought was disconnected from this, but now I'm realizing maybe was really connected. I was going through an experience in my therapy work of uncovering, childhood memories of sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And I've known for many years that I am a survivor of childhood sexual assault from an age that I remembered it happening.
Right.
And the memories that I was uncovering in July of last year indicated that there was an earlier sexual assault that I had not been able to recall, that I'm really still not able to fully recall. I'm still in the process of uncovering it. And so I spent so much of the month of July and a lot of August in like very much in a state of being triggered. And I mean that in the actual usage of the word, not in the popular usage that we all like. Everyone's like, I'm triggered by that. I'm triggered by that. And I'm like, no, I was like literally.
I've never been triggered. If you're
I'm like, no, I was literally in like and so I was like in a and also just in a state of like hypervigilance, because for anyone who's had that experience of uncovering childhood abuse memories, it's one of the things that you experience inside of it is you fear the memory that's coming.
Exactly.
You both want to know, but you really don't want to know. Like you fear that it's coming, and you fear that, especially in the process of beginning to uncover it, there's a fear that it's going to come through in a moment where you can't actually contain it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I was in this state of hypervigilance for like weeks of just like, I can't relax, because what if the memory just comes through and I'm like, at the fucking grocery store with my kids. Like, I'm not going to be able to handle it. I couldn't handle what came through during my therapy session. You know what I'm saying? Like, my therapist had to like hold my body up. So so then every time I would go onto Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, I would be like, I just have to log off immediately. I have to go right off immediately. I can't actually look at any of this. I remember getting really angry. I was angry that people were sharing their stories, not angry at people, but I was literally having this like aggravated experience of just being like, could people just stop? Don't people understand how harmful this is? It took me a few weeks to really just, detach enough from it to understand that like this same experience that was making me feel like I couldn't escape my body and couldn't escape my memories was something that was helping other folks feel more in their bodies and more in their memories and more in an ability to accept the experiences that they had or were having currently, Yes. And so I feel like, the way I was relating to it in the summer is pretty different from how I'm relating to it right now. I think I have a little bit more of a even as I was just doing, right? Like putting it in historical context. Like right now I'm able to sort of historicize and contextualize and understand the nature of what's happening in a way that like in August, I just couldn't take it in.
That's it. I feel so many things. I feel every time I think about harm coming to you when you were a child, it just breaks my heart, I'm like, I'm your older sister and where was I, like, how could I not protect you from things happening? And I'm also in my own process of trying to understand what happened in my own life. And I feel like last summer, it's so interesting because I think I was like I think at first I was just like, yeah, of course, y'all, like, of course. I think I was just like, yeah, we've all had this experience. Like I was glad that people were being brave and sharing. And I also felt like, I think I was disappointed by how surprised other people seemed by how prevalent, by how much harm had happened, right?
The avalanche.
Like when people were like, wow, it's so much. And I'm like, are you really shocked? Like the same way I feel, when someone's like, wow, so many Black people are being killed by the police. I'm like,
are you really shocked?
Like, where are you? Like, or like, oh my gosh, it's, it's a travesty what's happening in Gaza. I'm like, yeah, our country's a mess, like all these things. There's a way that I'm like, yeah, like where have you been? And then, but I think even that, what I'm learning about myself is there's a way that my frustration, like I'll feel frustrated and then that's covering up my hurt and this feeling of how do you continue to not see us and not see all the pain that's happening? And I know that part of what happened last fall, like summer into fall, was, as some of the stories got unveiled, I would be like, really? Like, that's not that bad. And I feel ashamed to say this, right? But it also feels important to say this, that like some of my initial reactions to some of the stuff was like, as a survivor, I'm like, really? Like, that's not that big of a deal, or like, you just need to learn to communicate better. And I know like around the Louis C.K. stuff, around Aziz Ansari stuff, that I was just kind of like, and it took me a while to really drop into, actually, no, that is harmful, which means if that was harmful to them, then similar experiences I had in my life, like, what I thought was like, here's my set number of sexual assault experiences, compounded, multiplied by all these other experiences where I was disempowered, not in consent, not even asked about something, we're so, not sober, not, like all the things that ideally you're supposed to be in an empowering sexual experience. And it's felt like the rug was pulled out of me as someone who has spent a huge amount of time thinking about these things in my own life and in the community that I'm a part of, and supporting other people through healing processes related to exactly this work. And I remember sitting with a very good friend of mine. We had like we got a hotel room for the night, and we each had our own little beds, and we each were sitting there just like in the robes of the hotel, just being like, yeah, like, what if this was, what if this was, what if this was, and kind of just sharing, like, kind of being able to vulnerably say, this happened, was that harmful? This happened, was that harmful? And can I sit with the breadth of harm that has happened to me? And if I sit with it, how do I continue? How do I move forward? And, to bring the journey to a more current place, I think part of what's also been happening is my abolitionist side is very like, oh, what do I do? What do we do right now? Like, how do we, because I'm like, I don't believe that prisons solve harm or stop harm or resolve trauma or resolve tragedy. I don't believe that they work, and I don't believe that humans belong in them. And so I look back at all the people who've caused harm to me, and I'm like, I don't think prison is the answer for them. But then I look at, like Harvey Weinstein just got arrested the other day, and I felt mixed feelings. I was just like, he does need to be held accountable. What is the accountability mechanism? I'm seeing all these people who have spoken up and said that they're abolitionists, and they just seem biting at the, I don't know what this is the other thing that's been happening is like, I've lost my communication skills around some of this.
Oh, yeah.
It feels like it touches into such a deep place in me that I become much less coherent than I usually feel. So what is it? Chomping at the bit. But I just feel like,
yeah, you got it.
I'm like, what is it? Chomping at the bit. Come on, Adrienne, your brain is still functioning. But I just feel like, and particularly looking at like Juno Diaz, who like, I'm in community with Juno. It's not like we're like, I'm close friends or anything with him, but, I've been through the VONA program, and I was deeply moved by his initial piece. And I've been looking at, how this has unfolded and how people, we're issuing statements, we're writing letters, we're taking these stances. And I'm inside of all of that. I'm like, yes. And I still want us to understand, like, as abolitionists, as people who believe in transformative justice, and as people who have been harmed, what do we do?
Yes. Mm-hmm. So I want to pull a couple of threads from what you said. Yeah. I actually first want to go back to this piece you were lifting up around surprise. And, or that, you were noting that you were disappointed in people's surprise and frustrated by people's surprise. And I think that as you rightly notice, it's both surprise is a form of resistance, and our frustration or annoyance with what's happening is also a form of resistance, right? And one of the things that I think we're all inside of in this moment is the myriad ways that we are all resisting knowing and understanding what's happening. I was just in a conversation the other day with an older man who was learning via the conversation that a man that he knew had been accused of sexual assault. And it was kind of incredible to watch his process of denial.
Yeah.
Like, it was triggering to hear, but also kind of amazing to watch him like trot out all of the reasons that people typically trot out for why this person that he trusts would never do it. Including he's married, including he does beautiful, amazing work, including I've always trusted him. Yes. All these things, all these different,
Cosby.
all of the things about his personality, all the things about his lifestyle, all the reasons why, like, he doesn't fit the profile, quote unquote. And exactly. I'm just sitting there in this conversation being like, wow, like, you're literally going through the cycle that everyone goes through of denial around why it is that this person, that you don't believe it. And I had grief. And it's grief. And at some point,
it's like losing someone. Yeah.
And exactly. And at some point I said to him, I was like, I'm never surprised when a man is accused of sexual assault. you know?
Yeah.
And he said, well, just because he's a man doesn't mean that he did it. And I was like, yeah, but because he's a man and we live inside of rape culture, our immediate go-to when we hear that someone has been sexually assaulted isn't necessarily like it doesn't make sense for the immediate go-to to be absolute denial that it's possible, right? Because we know that the most likely scenario, actually, like one of the things that I think is that we are uncovering inside of this moment is that if you are a man in our society, the most likely scenario is that you have behaved in an assaultive way towards someone. That is the most likely scenario, actually.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
If we look at the numbers.
And that you were trained to do so. That you
were trained to do so, right?
From the very
it's not
first
personal.
Step, breath,
it has nothing to do
life.
with your, it has nothing to do with your personality. There's no profile attached to it. There's nothing that makes someone more likely to assault aside from they are a man living inside of patriarchy. That's the thing that makes them most likely to assault, right? And so the assumption that there's like a particular profile, but then in this same conversation, I also then witnessed this man say that the person who was reporting the accusations was not a trustworthy person. Yes. So I also watched him do the thing that men that we see happening in our society as a whole of saying this person is not trustworthy, this other person is not trustworthy, right?
Exactly.
And you know, so it was really interesting to be inside of a conversation like that and be like, oh, we are not only so deeply trained into the normalcy of these behaviors, but we are also deeply trained into the normalcy of denial. Both denial of other people's lived experience, denial of any information that's coming through, you know, and an absolute just rejection of the information itself, right? And then on the flip, and I think that's where I think that like our gut reactions, you know, the gut reaction you're describing of disappointment and frustration, it makes a lot of sense inside of that because we as survivors, we know that we will not be believed, right? So there's like a, you know, I know in my life, there's been a real continuity of experience of both feeling like I can't be out as a survivor.
Yeah.
And that if I do come out as a survivor, it's giving something up.
Yep.
Or that if I do come out as a survivor,
what are you giving up?
That I'm giving up that in some way that, I mean, I'm learning now that it doesn't necessarily result in me giving up my agency. But for years, I protected my identity as a survivor of abuse. I would not tell people about it. Even people I was really close to, even people in my political work, I just would not come out as a survivor. Because for years it felt to me like it was this like, it felt like I would get dropped into this box and then the box got to be like lifted and carried around by people, but I would lose my agency inside of it. And you know, what I'm starting to do now is really connect that feeling that I'm going to be like put in a box with my actual assault. Right? That like there's a connection between like I perceive that if I identify as a survivor, then I'm going to be putting myself in a position to relive something. Right. And so I'm noticing now that like part of claiming that part of my life is about being able to actually integrate the experience in my body and in my memory so that it's not this like hidden dark corner of my memory that I can't like, because right now the way it functions in my life is that it's literally like there's a veil hanging over like a 2-year period of my childhood. And I can only I can slide the veil to the side and I can peek around it a little bit, but I can't actually see what happened during that window of time. Like I don't have access to it. And so I'm understanding that in order for me to get access to that and then fully integrate it, I have to come into my identity fully. But I'm having to figure out how I do that on my terms. And I think that's like, and that's what I'm witnessing inside of this political moment of like, everyone's trying to figure out like, how do we do it on our terms? Our terms meaning that it may not actually ever have anything to do with the perpetrator.
Yes, exactly. And like often, I mean, so there's so much richness in what you just shared, like all of it. I want to say I really feel you on the unveiling. And there's a way for me that I deny myself the space and the right to even go through the process because of that. Because it's like, it's behind a veil. It's fine. It already happened. Whatever it is already happened. I say I survived and I made it here. And like, why look back there? Right? Like, I'm here.
Right.
And there's people going through real stuff right now, leave the past in the past. Like there's all this stuff that happens. Yeah. So I just want to honor that there's something now where it feels like whether I wanted this to be a period of my life where I was doing unveiling around these experiences or not, I don't actually have as much agency as I might like to have. Because every day there's something that's coming up that I have to read and be like, oh, if that is what that person considers assault, I have yet another thing I have to deal with. And so, there's this way that it's like, oh, it's a tender time. And I think this piece around agency is so crucial because it's like what we want to it's like, I don't want to go unveiling things for no reason. I want to unveil towards my wholeness. I want to unveil towards real intimacy in my life. I want to unveil towards being in community with men and not feeling like they're all monsters or time bombs, but really feeling like they are, that there's a victim perpetrator blur that happens. Where it's like, and I think this has been maybe this is also part of my disappointment in this moment. And I've been trying to write about it and trying to think about it a lot, but just feeling like the only way I think that we get through this moment is if we're able to hold complexity. And that's not what we want to do because, it's a very heavy pendulum that we're swinging, right? And the pendulum has been on the side of rape culture for so long that it's like, anywhere I go, anywhere I am, that's a place where I might get my boundaries crossed, either with words, with touch, with sexual touch, like that might happen. And so the pendulum is swinging back the other way. And like, to me, that kind of masculine, I can assault anyone is a very reductive way of seeing women. And it's a very reductive way of power being held because it's not always man, women, right? Man, woman. There's a lot of men who have experienced sexual assault. There's a lot of trans people who have experienced sexual assault. There's a lot of, everyone is experiencing this, but it is to me so deeply tied to the way masculinity plays out in our culture and it's very reductive. And so then I see what happens for us is like, as the pendulum swings this way, we kind of get reductive too. Is just like, well, if once you're, if you cross the line to being an abuser, that's it. You're just an abuser. And no one will see the complexity of you, see the other things of you. People say we need to cancel, we need to get rid of, that's right. It. And I'm like, no, that reductive thing in and of itself is a masculine way of viewing the world or a masculinized way of holding power. And we are, on the other side of it, I identify this as a way that I hold my feminine power is very much about, I hold nuance and creative potential. I hold multitudes. I hold complexity. Like, I know that it's not this clean line. For most people, it's not a clean line between, I'm a pure victim, and we want these pure victims. And it reminds me of the same thing of like when a young Black person, when any Black person gets killed by the police, right? And they're like, oh, he was a model student, right? And it's like,
as though an F student or a C student deserves to be shot.
Exactly. F student, take him out. But B student who was trying hard, and I'm like the same thing. Like we want these pure narratives that are not true. The truth is we're complex people and then harm happens to us. None of us deserve any of it.
Right.
And then usually if that harm doesn't get touched into and healed and addressed, it manifests into something toxic. And we are in such a toxic overload right now And so I don't think there's any way that any kind of reductive politic is going to get us out of that toxic cauldron. I think that it's going to be holding complexity and being able to hold that each of these people who has caused harm, and especially the most egregious harm, comes from somewhere. And if we can't get to the root of what's causing that egregious harm, we will never stop it.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I think that some of it has to do with how we actually define harm. Because I think that like even, follow me here because this is going to be a little weird, but even like in the example you just gave of like if we take this out of sexual assault and look at police violence, part of the challenge that we've been up against inside of the Black Lives Matter movement and other movements against police violence is helping society at large understand that the police are violent. Helping society at large understand that when the police kill someone, it's harmful. It challenges a very baseline narrative that we have about the police, that white people have about the police, or I should say not just white people, but people who are protected by the police have, that when the police kill someone, they do so because that person deserved to be killed. And therefore it's not harmful that that person died, right? And so, so part of what's happening inside that work is helping people understand that anytime the police kill, it is harmful and violent. It is never not harmful for the police to murder someone. Okay. So I think that that's the similar, there's a similar thing happening inside of, or I wonder, I guess, if there's a similar thing happening.
Or just really quickly on that, like, you know, to get people to understand, like, there are countries where the police are not armed and somehow they are able to stop crimes from happening and catch criminals and like go through processes and no one dies. Right. And like that idea for people feels so like, what? Like, how could that happen? And yeah, so I just wanted to throw that in there because it feels like I'm following you and I'm like, yes. And like to get people to think like, oh, maybe something else is even possible is like, what? Right. So mind-blowing.
And to me, this really speaks to how we value life. And I think in our culture, in American culture, how we value life or don't value it is directly related to our invisibilized history of genocide and enslavement, right? That I think that because we have this, the foundation of our culture is genocide and enslavement. I think that has a real psychological impact on how we understand and value life and harm, like how we understand what harm is, right? And so going back into talking about sexual assault, I think that there's a real way in which like our collective history of brutality as like an acceptable part of life is still being lived out inside of this, right? That we are still having to have conversations about what qualifies as sexual assault, you know, that we are still having
Yeah. Well, and I was just talking about this. I literally was just saying this the other day to a friend because I was just like, you have a country that was founded on, we will rape Indigenous women and kill them. And we will rape Black women and kill them whenever we want to. Like that was what it meant to be a man, right? Was like, I will dominate I will dominate women in this way, or I will dominate my men by raping their women or taking their women or taking their children. And I'm like, then, you know, there's uprisings, there's pushings back, there's a technical slight step away from slavery culture, slight step away from Jim Crow. It's never like an exuberant leap forward, right? It's like, fuck, if I have to give up my slaves, I'll fucking give them up. But now who am I going to rape, right? Now who am I going to flog? Now who am I going to punish, right? That energy goes somewhere. It doesn't get transmuted because that change did not happen because people changed their hearts and minds. That change happened because they were put in their place. And I think right now, you know, big picture, the culture that we're living in, being in an America like this with Trump at the head of it, who is the epitome of a white plantation owning ignoramus, right? Like that's who he was 100 years ago. That's who he was, right? And like now here we have him again, like this kind of man at the head, and these kind of men and these kind of humans, Roseanne's and others, coming out of the woodwork, just like horrific human beings that are just, you know, I'm just like, Now, I don't doubt that there's transformative potential in you, because I deeply believe that every human has the capacity to transform. If I didn't, don't think I could even stay on this planet, right? But inside of that, uh, I'm just like, we have to understand that's how deep this rabbit hole goes, is that what is resurfacing and like what has been happening behind closed doors of our homes, and in this office workspace, all of that is like this culture of dominance that is tied back to the culture of dominance of slavery, that is tied back to the culture of dominance of genocide. And if we're going to heal it, we have to take it that seriously.
Right. And that the psychology is that powerful, right? And and I feel like this is the thing that I'm driving towards, is that all of this directly relates to how we understand whether something is harmful or not. And if we can't shift the landscape of understanding what is harm and what enables us to prevent harm, then there isn't hope of actually changing it, and there's no amount of storytelling that will change it, right? And so I think that, and I say that wanting to immediately qualify it with, I think that the storytelling is incredibly powerful. I think that the storytelling is a part of, it's absolutely a part of changing the landscape or shifting the trajectory. And there's a huge set of missing stories. We do not have the stories. We don't have the Me Too stories that we need, right? The Me Too stories that we need are men coming forward saying, I sexually assaulted. Me too. I also sexually assaulted, and here's how I did it, and here's what was happening in my body when I did it. And I'm not saying that anyone necessarily wants to hear those stories. And I know as a survivor, I would find that really challenging. And I also feel very aware that until, just like with white people and race, like until white people can get in touch with what happens in your body when you relax into the experience of having power over someone else's life.
Yes.
Men who have assaulted have to begin telling the story of what happened in your body when you relaxed into the power to take away someone else's agency over their body. Do you understand what happened? Do you understand as it's happening what is happening, right? So to me, and I think this is like leading us towards like the part 2 conversation that we're going to be having, right? Around like, what are the solutions? Because right now we're really inside the moment of, we are all, especially those of us who are survivors, I think many of us are feeling at a loss. And we're trying to figure out like, what are some of the possible solutions? And I do think that inside of that, one of the solutions is men actually coming forward and like having their own movement of coming out as assaulters, right? Coming out as people who have abused.
I think this is huge. And I feel like I want to share a little piece, because I wrote this piece called We Will Not Cancel Us, which I felt like this is at my best thinking about this moment, this is the heart of my best thinking, right? I was like, okay, I got this. I understand this much of it. And it's very much, Autumn, super tied into this, that like, those who have caused harm need to be able to speak from the place of having caused that harm, and not to continue to have all of the emotional labor on those who went through the harm and have survived, and now are like, and now more labor, and now more labor, and now more labor, right? It's so close to that same thing with racism, where it's like, I don't want to tell you any more about how to be a good white person. I want you to go read some books and like go talk to Catalyst and like figure it out. And I'm like, I want to see like, what is the Catalyst equivalent? What is the Surge equivalent? Like, what is the equivalent of radical mass movement for men and for those who have caused harm? What is the Sexual Harmers Anonymous? Like, what are the spaces where these stories will get told, and where folks will start to self-correct and self-manage some of this work? Because it's not about more workshops and trainings on how to stop being a fucking asshole sexual assaulter. Like, that all that stuff is out there, right? It's like the culture shift has to happen there. So I'll read this a little bit, and then I think we're probably at time, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I said, we will not cancel us, but we must earn our place on this earth. We will tell each other we hurt people and who. We will tell each other why and who hurt us and how. We will tell each other what we will do to heal ourselves and heal the wounds in our wake. We will be accountable, rigorous in our accountability, all of us unlearning, all of us crawling towards dignity. We will learn to set and hold boundaries, communicate without manipulation, give and receive consent, ask for help, love our shadows without letting them rule our relationships. And remember, we are of earth, of miracle, of a whole, of a massive river. Love, life, life, love. We all have work to do.
Yes.
So, yeah, I feel like, if I can keep remembering we all have work to do and it requires communication, then I can see a way forward. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that, Adrienne.
I love you so much for being in this conversation with me, sweetheart.
I'm glad we started this off. It is a hard one, and there's more to come. So just for our listeners, we are gonna have a part 2 and possibly even a part 3 of this conversation. We're gonna move into talking about transformative justice as a movement, as an area of work that many people are doing really incredible and important work around. We are going to also talk about the role of fame and famousness inside of Me Too and Time's Up, and how is that impacting what accountability looks like. And we're also going to have some really exciting interviews, we hope, as a part of this process. So stay tuned. There's more coming. And thank you for listening and being a part of this journey with us. We know that these are really hard conversations to have. All right, let's go to our credits, huh? What do you say?
I'm ready.
Okay. Thanks for listening to our show. We're on Twitter and Instagram at End of the World PC. We're also on Facebook at End of the World Show.
You can make a sustaining donation to our show by visiting our page at patreon.com/endoftheworldshow. And I want to just give you a very special update that everyone who is a patron of ours so far, and anyone who makes it basically in the next couple weeks, is going to get a very special gift. Our friend Dori Midnight has created a tincture, an apocalypse potion for how to survive the end of the world, and we'll be sending those out to you. So if you already are a patron, it's going to be coming your way. We'll give you some instructions soon about how to sign up, and you'll get some special stuff. And if you're not a patron but you love apocalypse potions, go ahead and become a sustaining donor, and we will get it to you.
It's so exciting.
It's very exciting.
In addition to becoming a patron, another helpful thing you can do to help us sustain ourselves is write us a review on Apple Podcasts if you're an iPhone person. Thanks.
How to Survive the End of the World is produced and edited by the fantastical Zach Rosen. Music for today's session comes from Tunde Olanaran and Mother Cyborg.